Now that everybody had time to cool off, let's take another look at these Nova Grappler cards and see if they're actually as strong as a lot of people make them out to be.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, today we're going to talk once again about the new Nova Grappler cards. Yesterday I already talked about the cards when they were first revealed, about what their skills are and how strong they could potentially be and their interactions and all kinds of jazz that I usually do when I talk about the newly revealed cards. However, what I didn't address in that video in very detail was my opinion on what I thought about the cards, if they were as strong as other people thought, or that I was more on the side of it's fair and it's not overpowered as a lot of people make them out to be. So that is what we're going to do in this video, as I think a lot of people were scared when they first got the announcement of the new cards with the front triggers and the insane power they're going to get, and this is going to be a super power creep of what we had before and it's going to invalidate all your old cards, and I'm going to address it right out of the gate. That's not what's going to happen, at least not what we have seen of late. These cards aren't as strong as a lot of people screamed them at the moment the cards were revealed. And I'm gonna explain that in this video. So let's dive right into the cards themselves to explain why a lot of people were anxious at the beginning at all. So what we've got revealed were 4 cards. We've got a new VR that could increase the power of your front triggers with an additional 10k. So front triggers would be 20k when you drive check them. That's a pretty big significant change. But it also got a second ability where it allows you to, for a counter plus 1 and a discard in Nova Grappler, that is something you need to keep in mind. For discard, you could get an additional drive check, and if you went second and your opponent is already at grid 3, you also get another crit. That's very important, as with the extra drive checks, it allows you to hit your front triggers more consistently, as without the front trigger power, its first ability is basically a meaningless skill. And with the extra crit, that also helps the problem with front triggers, as if you're going to run a lot of front triggers to be able to enable his first ability, you're probably not going to run crits, meaning your opponent can easily no-guard your Vanguard or take your rear guard's attacks, as they're only going to do 1 damage. With the additional crit, they cannot really do that as easily as they could have without the crit. So in this case, you're going to deal 2 damage and maybe 3 if you run extra crits, but let's take it as an example where we don't run the extra crit. So that's 2 damage that your opponent is facing. That in itself is a pretty good, powerful card, as you can triple drive and you have the crit in itself. So you can get the discard back, so you trade in a card for an extra drive check. That's a good trade-off. But then we get into the other cards that basically enables this engine to a full extent. We've got a grade 2 that can give the front triggers an additional 5k. So with one of those grade 2s on the field, your front triggers will give 25k power with the help of the VR. That's a lot of power for a single front trigger for a drive check, and that is going to give to all your front row rear guards. So if you have a full field with an axle marker, you're going to give 100k power to the front row with one single front trigger drive check. That's a lot of power, keep that in mind. Then also the grade 2 has an ability that on plays you can check top 5, search for the grade 3 VR, and if you found it, you can discard a card from your hand. So you basically trade in the grade 3 for another card in your hand. So once again, it looks like we're plussing, but this card actually is a wash. You trade in a card from your hand into a grade 3. So this is somewhat of a consistency bump to pull out your aggro turns a little bit faster and more consistent. Then we also got another grade 2 that allows you to restand him if you drive check a front trigger. And this is where a lot of anxiety also came from, because it allows the deck to also multi-tag, as the other cards don't really allow to multi-tag it to some extent. So we've got a grade 2 that is 9k on its own, and when we get a front trigger, we get at least 20k power on it if we have the grade 3, so it will swing again for 29k. That's nothing to sneeze at. And if we have the other grade 2, that can even be 34 or even higher if it's on an axle marker and that kind of stuff. So that can be very deadly in its own regards. But then the cherry on top is a grade 1 that basically is on plays, you can put a front trigger from your hand and put it on the top of your deck. So with that grade 1, you can stack the deck with front triggers, and that is basically the nail in the coffin for a lot of people to say this is outright broken, because you get a lot of power onto your front row for free, as nothing really costs anything. You have the grade 1 that can put a front trigger from your hand on top of the deck, and maybe even 2 or 3 if you stack them, because you don't draw, so you can stack them all, and give your front row insane amounts of power and get free power, also restand rear guards, and do all kinds of stuff in your finger to triple drive and a potential extra crit. And this is just too broken, because a lot of people cannot deal with those numbers, as you're hitting for 50, 60k columns very easily without any problem. This is what a lot of people were scared about. But this is now where I'm going to explain why this is an optimal situation, and the cards themselves are just very, very inconsistent with what we got right now. Before I'm going to go any further, we need to keep note that we are currently talking about the 4 cards that have been revealed for Nova Grappler. There are going to be no more cards for Nova Grappler revealed, but we don't know if it's going to support this archetype more, if we're going to get more BSTT support, and if we're going to get more hero support. So they could go either way to make this even more stronger or more consistent. There are a lot of things that they can introduce for this build to still not make it outright overpowered, because there is a glaring weakness with it, which I'm going to cover in a moment. So first off, with these cards, the biggest offender is the grade 1 that could allow you to stack the deck, because that's a consistency boost that is very strong. So a lot of people have been comparing this card with Tetramagus, but that is something that you should not do at all. This card is nowhere near similar to Tetramagus. Yes, they both are on place and allows you to put a trigger on top of your deck. That's where the similarities completely ends, because Tetramagus can allow you to draw a card, but it does cost a counterblast, but you get a draw out of it, and you can potentially do not put the trigger back, so you get a +1 out of the card. Then the counterblast cost is pretty justified, because you can draw from it. The Nova Grappler one doesn't draw you a card, so you need to minus on hand to get that trigger effect off, and Oracle Think Tank can just wash it and get the crit effect off. So there's also a big difference in that regard. But the main glaring difference between the two cards is the clan in which they are positioned in. The Tetramagus is in a protect clan for Oracle Think Tank. That clan is drawing a lot of cards, has a lot of late game potential, and can stall the game very consistently. So the value of that card is pretty good, because you need the crits to finish, and also because you're drawing a lot of cards, you're going to have a crit in hand basically at all times of the game. So you're going to use that skill whenever you want to use that skill. For Nova Grappler, this isn't the case. You need to have a front trigger in your hand to use that grade 1. If you do not have a front trigger in your hand, that is a 7k vanilla card that doesn't do anything. And Nova Grappler isn't drawing any cards at this stage, because the cards in this build, how it looks like, they have 0 draw potential. And then actually minusing, that's not a good thing. So the chance that you have a front trigger in your hand is not as guaranteed as you had with Tetramagus, because you can basically say that Tetramagus will always be paired off with a crit trigger in your hand. This grade 1 isn't going to be the same case with a front trigger, so that's why you need to keep that in mind, the major difference between this card and something we have seen with Tetramagus. This card is needed for the deck. It's absolutely going to be needed, but it's not as consistent as that card itself. And that brings us to the main problem to this build, is that it's super piece reliant, and it's in a deck that's not going to draw at all, because you're going to need all your pieces to make this build work. You need the grade 2, you need the grade 1, you need the other grade 2 that could reset, and you need this grade 3 to make it all work. But how you're going to pull them off each and every time consistently with the very few draw options that you have? Actually, this build has no draw options, because the grade 1 is a minus, the grade 2 that can search the grade 3 is a wash, because you can fetch it to hand, and it's only top 5, so it could definitely whiff. And if you get it to hand, you need to discard a card, so that's also not a plus on your hand. Then the grade 3 with the extra drive check, you need to discard for the additional drive check. So again, that's not a plus. You're going to get more drive checks, so that's a very good trade-off for the build, because you need to drive check your front triggers. So the more drive checks you're going to get, the more consistent it's going to be. But that's also a major problem, is the consistency of the build. Not only do you have a very limited hand size, so defending against opponents' onslaught, and a lot of decks, especially the current Excel decks that are now out with the new Tachikaze, the new Narukami, as well as the new Maelstrom, are going to be so powerful that they're going to walk over this deck with the limited defense that they got. But when they're going to be on the offensive, their entire offensive relies on you getting front triggers. If you do not drive check a front trigger, your entire deck is vanilla. The grade 2 doesn't do anything. It's a 9k, doesn't do anything. The restander is a 9k that doesn't do anything. The grade 1 is then a 7k if you do not have a front trigger in your hand. It's a 7k do nothing. That's a big problem. If you do not see your front triggers, you're going to be very severely limiting your offensive capabilities. So what you can do is run 12 fronts. That's an obvious option that you have. But if you do that, you need to either cut your heals, so that's even more risky against other clans, or you can cut your draw PGs, but that not only hinders your defense options, unless you're going to run the grade 1 PG, but it also limits your other options that you potentially could add into the deck, but you also limit your extra draw potential that you could rely on hitting your key pieces, so you're even more RNG reliant to hit your pieces to actually do something. So you already can see the big problem here. And this is just the problems within the deck itself. When we take a look at the environment we're in, there are a lot of control decks we're currently running around. We have Narukami that can just field wipe your board, and if they do that and they hit 3 to 4 units, how are you going to refill them with your limited hand size? And we also got Blade Master or Kagero that could blow up your field. We got other clans that also got more rearguard removals, like Tachikaze with the new VR that can also destroy your field. So there are a lot of decks that can just outright destroy your field, and with your very limited hand size that you already need to preserve to be able to defend against them, you now also need to forcefully call units to the field. That is going to be a problem, and that tagged on with the whole RNG reliance situation, that is going to make the deck very, very high rolly. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being a high roll deck and being as powerful as they are is actually very justified, and that's the balance part in this build. It's very strong. It can dish out a lot of powerful attacks and can restand for free, but it comes with a very RNG heavy cost of outright playing the deck. And it's the same thing that we could see with the Tachikaze build when they got in the first wave. It was super strong at the time, but it's super high rolly. If it was high rolling, nothing could stop it. And that was a balance factor in the deck. Even now with the new support for Tachikaze, they can just, when you're a grade 2, when they write their VR and they got 2 or 3 copies of the new triple R grade 2, the Sweeper, Toronto, Kento, if they got that in hand and they call it, in the right situations, you can just forcefully put the gauges underneath those units to give them 3 gauges, and then sweep in with 4 attacks over 30k, then attack with the Vanguard, restand all 3, and then attack another 3 times with this unit. A lot of decks on grade 2 just outright die at that point. And they can do that. There is an option for them to actually do that, but it's super high rolly and piece reliant. That's once again the same thing that we're going to see with this new God Hand Dragon build. It's going to be very high rolly as it stands right now, but if it does high roll, it's probably going to kill you. And that's, in my opinion, the balance part as well. And when we compare it to other cards that Nova Grappler already has, we can see some nice interactions where we combine it with the grade 2 with an extra crit. That could very well benefit from the extra front trigger power, because it on itself is only 3k. But when you hit one front trigger with the addition of 25k, that thing is suddenly 28k with double crit. That's a good addition for the deck. Or you can go with the grade 2 kick to allow for more restands, as you're not using a lot of counterblast for your other costs. But keep in mind, both those options that I just talked about are grade 2s. And we already have the grade 2 that can search and can give additional power. And we have the grade 2 that restands. That's something we need to keep in mind, that already 2 grade 2 spots are filled. So there's only one actual grade 2 spot that you can fill in with a lot of copies. And sure, you can split it up with less copies with more different cards, but then you're actually going to make the problem worse, that you need to draw into your pieces, as you're lowering the quantity and the consistency of drawing into those pieces. So as you can see, there are definitely some deck building challenges accompanied to this build. And yes, they can become more threatening if they get more draw potential and other stuff, but as it stands right now, it's very unlikely that they're going to get that. So in short, this build is very high roll dependent as it stands now with the cards that has been revealed, as you're going to push out a lot of power if everything goes right. But in actuality, not everything is going to go right. You're going to have an opponent that's going to fight back. And with your limited hand size and your limited draw potential, that fighting back could be the bullet that's going to put this deck down. So depending on the other support cards we're going to get, this could either make the deck playable, or it could make the deck just outright bonkers, or even just unplayable. Because I honestly think, as the card stands right now, I don't believe that they are going to make a change in the meta or going to be very impactful. It's just super RNG. Your entire engine relies on drive checking a specific trigger. That's never a good thing. In no way, shape, or form could that be a consistent option to say that's a meta defining deck. And it could only be the case if it is as strong as something like the Ezel Raichen in Premium. But unlike that engine, this engine doesn't only rely you to drive check a specific trigger, it also needs to rely on that you draw into cards that benefit from you drive checking that trigger. And that is the major difference, as you're relying on so many factors to go your way. And that is going to make this deck at least fair in the current state. But that's basically sums up everything about why I think these cards aren't overpowered or bonkers as a lot of people suggest they are. Because this build, they're going to have a draw issue as it stands now, they're going to have a consistency issue, and they're going to rely on heavy RNG to just outright make their cards playable. Because if you do not drive check your front trigger, you're actually just playing with vanilla cards, and that's even weaker than a trial deck. So take that as you want. These cards, in my honest opinion, are pretty fun to play around. I'm definitely looking forward to more support that works with the whole front trigger aspect, because it looks like a really fun build. But I am not convinced at this point that these cards are going to be super broken and it's going to define the meta. I'm currently not convinced that that's the case, and it is. It could change. I'm definitely open for change, because they could get another double R or triple R that could completely flip this whole thing upside down. But as it stands now with these 4 cards, I'm not convinced that they are as OP as a lot of people screamed them out to be yesterday. But that's basically everything for me today. Let me know in the comments down below what your opinion is about this new Nova Grappler cards. Are you on the camp that these cards are just way too strong or way overpowered? Or do you think they have obvious flaws? They are balanced in the way that they are in Nova Grappler, a less consistent archetype, a less consistent clan that doesn't really have a lot of draw power. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments down below, and let the discussion going. As always, I want to thank my Patreon supporters over at Patreon for making this video possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel and everything that's happening on the channel, then head over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!